see a punter, because this is a sneaky good pickup. I just got to be real with you. You know, what's interesting, from year one under Brian Kelly in special teams until now, until the last game that you played when Aaron Anderson returned to kickoff for a touchdown, I think you've been hit and miss in some areas. Ramos has been hit and miss at times. You've been hit and miss at times in the return game. But this portal haul, for what it's worth, you have really upped your game on special teams. I think it even happens here with Grant Chadwick, who has 3 years left of eligibility. Now, what people see is, well, Blake, he only averaged 43.4 yards per punt. And what I would tell you is, as a freshman who was on the Ray Guy Award watch list this season, punts aren't created equally. Like 4 of the last 5 games, as an example, Chadwick averaged a long of 55 yards and an average of 53 yards at Middle Tennessee. But another thing is, he had one that dropped his average down. He had a 27-yard punt that got downed inside the 3, but he also had a 60-yard punt that landed at the 1, and it didn't go in for a touchback. The kid is very talented. I'm not sure where he's at on portal punter rankings. But what I do is, and I shared this on social media, I'm just on Twitter mainly, but I shared it on social media, punts aren't created equally. You brought in a punter last year, and Blake Oschendorf, who came in hurt, and I had high hopes for him. I really have high hopes for this kid too, and let me tell you why. Guys, you got to be able to flip field position, and you got to take the onus and the pressure off of Nuss and this offense any way that you can. Guys, field position and special teams are still a big deal. Teams historically, okay, don't always go 75 yards plus on you. It's actually statistically one of the worst. It doesn't happen often. Doesn't happen. But it's so crazy of what a drive starting off at the 30 does for your odds of scoring a touchdown versus starting at the 25 or 20. And God forbid you start inside the 10. It's where you got Ole Miss a couple times too, if you remember. And that's why you keep these games close when you're able to play really good special teams. 4 of the last 5 games, like we mentioned, Chadwick had an average best of 55 yards with an average punt of 53 yards. Can this kid come in as a sophomore with 3 years of eligibility and start flipping the field? Guys, we got to be better. We got to be better there. We got to be better in the kicking game. And I got to tell you, I've heard some things about Aaron Burrell. I don't know if Aaron Burrell, who's been making field goals from about 57, 58, somebody told me that he had a 60-yarder the other day. I don't know if what kind of versatility can that kid give you going into next year? Can he beat out Damian Ramos? Can he beat him out? I don't know. What I do know is the kid's got a bazooka of a leg, and he can kick it a hell of a ton for yardage, and I don't know if he's accurate. I don't know any of that. But I know he's got a very, very powerful leg. Can this Chadwick come in, and what is a key and subtle pickup that nobody wants to really talk about, right? You don't want to be in the chat talking about punting. You don't want to be talking about special teams. Every time we talk about special teams, our views go all the way down. And I understand as to why. But, man, it's such a big deal to be able to do and flip the field on special teams. Always has been, always will be. Football, even though it's innovated so much, and football has innovated way guys, think about football 10 years ago. Now think of football now and how the game's changed. It's changed massively, man. Massively. So when I look at this kid, look, he's down a lot of punts inside of the 10-yard line. He had 4 in his last 3 games inside the 15. And he technically punted the ball from the 30 and it landed at the 1, too. Got a little bit of a roll, or the 2-yard line, whatever it was. Got a little bit of a roll. Technically, they snapped it at the 40, so they made it a 6-yard punt. I get it. kick and punt, man. And when you have somebody that's deadly there, one thing that I'll tell you, since we talked about Bama and I've been defending myself all day, Saban was great at it. Great coaches are great at it. Brian Kelly at Notre Dame was great at it. They were really good at it. Playing really good special teams and good defense. It's not the pickup that everybody wants, but it's the pickup that LSU football needs right now. To quote Batman Begins in some odd way. Or The Dark Knight, whatever it was. It's a big pickup. And I hope that this kid can come in here. And if he does what he did at Middle Tennessee State, then who knows? You know that the voodoo will always be rocking in Tiger Stadium. So maybe this kid can come in here and do something good. Let's get on to the next one. So you add Chadwick in, and AJ Swann, the backup quarterback, who we saw come in against Oklahoma, exits the building. Look, I think AJ Swann came in here to back up Garrett, okay, and fight for a secondary position. What happened here, and here's the truth, from what I saw, Ricky Collins had beat him out. And Ricky Collins had beat him out in the sense of that he was just an overall better quarterback in everything that he does. And Swann could never overcome it. Now, a kid that's played in the SEC and's got some stats in the SEC, and it's fine. But when I saw him at LSU, for whatever it's worth, I don't even think he was better than Ricky. Now, I never really saw him and Colin Hurley go toe-to-toe, but I would assume some things too. AJ's a good kid. I heard that he was never late to meetings. I heard that he was always on time, working out, worked hard, was in the film room, did everything that you would ask the young man to do. Just don't know if the ability is there. But it does bring up an interesting question about what happens in the future. Well, you brought in Michael Van Buren, and I'm sure that question started then. But we saw AJ Swann against Oklahoma, and I will say this, because I know he's got experience, and I think it's tough to come off the bench, and it's tough. It's not easy. I'm not going to judge him off of 4 throws against Oklahoma coming off the bench. I'm just not going to do it. But what I saw with my eyes is that I personally thought that Ricky Collins had made it abundantly clear that he was a better overall quarterback than AJ Swann that we had seen. And Ricky had done that in the sense of that he was just more athletic. He was able to move. And since teams and guys couldn't catch him, that's why he was able to be a little bit more prolific. Ricky was did some really good things in space. And I'll give him that. It's going to be interesting to see where he lands as well. But he came here as a backup. And I know we were probably asking, well, Blake, why didn't Ricky Collins go in against Oklahoma? I don't know that answer, and I don't know what to tell you there. The only thing that I would say is that maybe Ricky had told everybody what he intended to do, and going into the portal, he was one of the first, if I'm not mistaken, if not the first player that went into the portal for LSU, and you're like, okay, I guess it is what it is. But it does bring up an interesting question about what is happening at quarterback behind Garrett Nussmeier. Let's go there. You obviously bring in Michael Van Buren, who, because Blake Shapen at Mississippi State got injured, Michael Van Buren comes in. And in my God's honest opinion, and what I've seen in Michael Van Buren, and I know that Carter and I talked about this on Monday, the stretch of games that Michael Van Buren had to start and play in was a brutal, brutal stretch. Like, think about this. If I would have told you in the beginning of the season, take the name off of it, I'm just going to give you a random quarterback as an example. And in that randomness, I would have told you that half of the games that this young man would start, he would go against ranked opponents. And it would be a murderer's row of the SEC. And what if I told you that young man had 16 total touchdowns, he had 7 turnovers, which is a lot of freshman mistakes, and that his team wasn't really good? What would you have said? You would have said, well, I mean, kid's got some serious upside. But see, where I start thinking about it is, I could have also made that same exact thing for DJ Lagway. I could have made that same argument for DJ Lagway, the quarterback that beat you, right? Because not only did DJ Lagway was the quarterback when Florida beat you, he was also the quarterback when they beat Ole Miss. See a little similarities here? So when you talk about Michael Van Buren coming in, see, I got you on that one. I know I did. Michael Van Buren coming in, I don't really think that there is a debate. Assurances are going to have to be made for Michael Van Buren, who was a starter in the SEC. Hey, I'm going to come here. If I can play in 4 games or less, I'm going to sit behind Nuss. I'm going to learn. I'm going to work my ass off. And God forbid, something happens. I've been in these shoes before. Starting quarterback goes down. I come into the SEC. Perfect. And Michael Van Buren is clearly and easily better than what we saw from AJ Swann at Vandy. The turnovers for Mike, here's what I'll say. The turnovers for Michael Van Buren have got to go down. The decision-making has got to improve. So one thing that I will say about your quarterback room right now, both of them, and Garrett, Van Buren, and yes, even Colin Hurley, a lot of them make bad decisions. And what it tells me here is that either there's a disconnect of Joe Sloan getting them and teaching them and telling them what they need to do. I don't know that. What I do know is that going into year 2 from Jaden and et cetera, things improve with Joe Sloan and quarterbacks as starters. So I look at Van Buren. I don't know what Colin Hurley does. But even if you let them go after it and battle in the spring, let them go after it and battle in the spring. Why are we going to shy away from competition here? I'm not going to shy away from competition. Now, in my head, I have a pretty good idea of who I think is going to win that battle, but let them battle it out. And God forbid one of them surprises you even more than what you're thinking about to back up Garrett Nussmeier, then so be it. But I do think that Michael Van Buren will probably be the future answer for you. He's got a lot of push and a lot of pull in that room and that building right now, meaning LSU football ops. If I tell you this once, I'll tell you this a gajillion times. You don't go in the portal for a quarterback and the head coach is not heavily involved. I don't care what anybody tells you. I don't care if your great uncle on your mama's side has connections to anybody inside of LSU. Let me tell you what I know for an outright fact. Quarterback decisions are made by the head coach, ultimately, because he could shoot it down. Coaches are not going to tie themselves to quarterbacks if they don't think that they can play. Now, if you already have a really good room and you think that there's somebody out there that you can take a risk on because you have the depth, that's a completely different situation. It's why you bring in a young kid like Colin Hurley when your room was pretty deep. That's what she said. Let Colin Hurley and Michael Van Buren battle this out. But I'm going to tell you, Michael Van Buren is dude, brother can play. Dude is flat out really good. He makes elite throws. But the thing for me is that I love the fact as an early quarterback, even in the turnovers, he if his first 2 to 3 reads were not there, he was gone. Like he's the road runner. He's gone. Ask Georgia how that works. Ask Texas how that works. Ask Ole Miss how that works. Because Ole Miss had the best defensive line in the country. It's not a debate. The best D-line in the country, and he gave them fits. He gave them fits. Probably and arguably 4 defensive linemen that will be drafted moderately high. How he got out of some of those things is beyond me, but he's athletic. He can throw. He is better than Ricky Collins, as an example. And I do think the mentality is there. Like, as an example, there was a 3rd and 1, and they ran a zone read Okay, I went and watched the Ole Miss and Mississippi State game a couple of days ago. They ran a zone read on 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2. Did Mississippi State? Walter Nolan or either Walter Nolan or Human Yellen, I forget, burst through the line for Ole Miss. My man put his head down, was able to get the first down, gets up and starts talking shit to a guy that's probably 6 inches taller than him and probably 120 pounds more heavier than him, and he didn't give a shit. He did not care. He just said, I am not going to be denied here. I love that mentality. I absolutely love that mentality. He showed it all year. So I circle all this back around to say, there had for AJ Swann to leave, there had to be a conversation about Van Buren being your number 2. Or that they're going to go with Van Buren and Hurley and let them battle it out. Now, the last piece of this, even though I do think that Van Buren got assurances, the last piece of this is, God forbid, knock on wood, please, dear Lord, don't let this happen, but God forbid you get in a situation in the bowl game where Nuss has got to come out for a drive. Then you really then you throw in a Keion Hurley who is not going. I don't know if I shouldn't say I don't think he's ready because I hadn't seen him in 6 months. The last time, I'm going to be very curious to see how this goes. Because the last time that I got eyes on Keion Hurley, it was not good. He's a true freshman. He's a 17-year-old kid. It's not supposed to be good. But God forbid that happens right now. And if it does, you're just going to have to live with it, and hopefully he can make some throws and he can do some really good things. But now Keion Hurley's got to step up and be your number 2. Right now, technically, before Van Buren comes in here, he is your number 2. And I do think that he's going to beat him out. So, 2026 is going to be very interesting, especially about where you go at quarterback. Now, when I look at LSU in the 2026 class, and I look at some of the offers that they have out there at quarterback, okay, for 2026, you're going to have to land one of these quarterbacks. So you got Ryder Lyons, Jared Curtis, Diabell, Jonas Williams. You got some things you got to make up here because I think that you didn't really, I don't want to say you didn't focus on. I don't want to say that you didn't focus on quarterback for 2026, but the reason you didn't is because, well, you were anticipating that you got Bryce Underwood. But there are a lot of quarterbacks in the 2026 class that maybe you can go after. I think the Duckworth kid can play. Landon Duckworth out of Jackson, Alabama. Kid can move, man. And if that's the kind of system you want to go in, then go in it. You know, what does Ryder Lyons do out of California? Is that I know that USC, a lot of people think he'll go there. But what do you do here at quarterback? It's going to be a big, big question for me. Very, very big question for me on what you do. So I guess we'll see. But the quarterback room right now, for what it's worth, it's you know, I don't want to say it's up in the air because you do have Garrett and you do have Van Buren, but it's an interesting conversation nonetheless to have. And I'm sure we'll have it throughout the offseason. I'm sure we'll have it in a lot of different times. But it's going to be really interesting to see how that entire room pans out. All right. Let's get to this one thing, and I need to get to a break here. So, Keion Lacy is entering the NFL draft. I'm pretty much assuming that he is going to be going to or skipping the bowl game and just going to the draft. I asked around. They said he hadn't been there, like practice, whatever, and they don't anticipate him to play in the game. So we'll go from there. So Keion Lacy is entering the NFL draft. And Keion Lacy has had an interesting career here at LSU. Keion had 58 catches this year for 866 yards and 9 touchdowns. What's interesting about that, and what's interesting about his career, guys, Keion was productive in 3 years. I mean, he had production. 112 catches, 1,692 yards, 16 touchdowns. Did Keion Lacy. Had a lot of drops in there. A lot of drops. But never could work his way into a true number one. I don't think he was your number one this year. I think Aaron Anderson was. So Keion's had a productive career. I wish him well. But, man, he did give you some pretty high production, right? I mean, 58 catches this year, 66 yards, and 9 touchdowns. If you're forcing him to be a number one, he did good. Keion is a big-bodied wide receiver too. He needs somebody to play outside of him. He needs somebody that can be a number one in alpha, and then him be the secondary piece. I think that Keion. I think that here's what I'll say. I think that there's going to be a front office like what happened to your boy from Opelousas. Guys, who's the Opelousas wide receiver that went to Florida State? Y'all help me out in the chat here. He carved us up. I forget. God, dog it. I'm trying to think. I can't even think of God, dog it. Keion Coleman. I think somebody's going to fall in love with his personality, and so we'll go from there. Keion had 110 targets this year, or over 110 targets this year. 58 catches. Guys, you went to him way too much. We talked about that a lot. About how I felt like they were trying to force feed him when they had no business trying to force feed him. I think he's just a number two. I think a front office will fall in love with his personality. We see it happen every year because he's energetic, he's outgoing, he's extroverted, and he's going to go somewhere. I don't think that his draft grade is as high as maybe some think, but I do think that Keion is going to be a good NFL player. He can work himself into being a good NFL player. And good on him. Had a lot of, goes 100 plus catches in a career is a lot. I'm sorry. I mean, it's a lot. Now, it's not like Malik or Brian Thomas or Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson's. Like, it's not a lot, right? Like, I get all that. But it's a lot of production in 3 years. And look, man, Keion was there. And Keion did make some big plays. The Ole Miss play to end it at the end. He had the Ole Miss fade route catch that put you and gave you the lead against Ole Miss last year. The end of the half against Alabama and Caleb Downs when he caught the touchdown and broke a tackle and scored, and the game was tied at halftime. And you're like, holy shit. Like, Jaden Daniels, my gosh. Here's what I'll tell you. Jaden Daniels' first half for me was his Heisman. The first half versus Alabama was his Heisman moment. It was an entire Heisman moment. Killer. But overall productive. Okay, so we're going to do this. Let me get to a quick break. Everybody's on Joseph. What did Joseph say up in here? Man. See, I say it every day. I don't know how much more I can say it. Do y'all really think I hate Garrett? Do you really think I hate him? I do not hate him. It never ceases to amaze me. I do not hate him. I say the kid's got to guys, he had 16, 17 turnovers in 12 games. Saying that that's got to get better makes y'all look like an idiot. Sorry, it does. If you think that that's not a problem and that your quarterback's got to cut down on turnovers from 17 of them, then you're an idiot. You're an outright idiot. Turnovers have got to get better. And if you're in the camp and saying that it doesn't need to get better, you do not know ball.